at Terrapin, and we're happy to have you with us today. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity and insurance and cybercrime, a topic that has become, unfortunately, the new norm for many businesses that we work with, either by choice or by necessity. And to help us with that discussion, we have a guest speaker with us today, Matt Davis. Matt, welcome to our webinar and our discussion today.
Thanks for having me.
So Matt is the president of GDI Insurance. Let me flip up his picture here. You can get a nice mugshot of him there. And Matt, you became the president of GDI, I think it was back in 2015, and the owner of GDI. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, I bought out the remainder of the company at the end of 2015.
Nice. And I noticed, I saw, I did a little bit of spelunking on your website and saw that you liked, doing stuff with your family. I know that I love doing things with my boys, and especially anything away from their computers, even though I work with computers, getting them outdoors and running and playing around. And I saw that you love to do the same. So we have a commonality there that I can appreciate.
Oh, yeah.
So, how did you get into, with, cyber insurance? I see these types of things and questions. A lot of times we'll get questionnaires from our clients on, hey, we want to get cyber insurance. We have this questionnaire to fill out. Is that kind of how it came about to you, or how you hear about it from your clients? How did cyber insurance, and what does it cover? What's involved?
So the history of cyber insurance, it really spun off of two other coverage lines, both property and liability. On the property side, there is traditionally, and there still is, valuable papers and records coverage, which covers, if you think of the old file cabinets, if there was a fire in the building or a theft, it would cover the recreation of those. And then you have the liability section, where general liability really doesn't anticipate the cyber liability exposure of, protected data that you may be holding on to or using for your clients or customers. So that's really where cyber came around. Now today, cyber has become a much more large animal. It used to be, anywhere from 1 to 3 questions to get a cyber insurance quote that was actually bindable and approved. Now it can be multiple pages. It can be fairly in depth. There could be pre-risk control requirements, and that's because just the extent to which this coverage now can apply. You have breach cost, you have the cost of what if you get ransomware. We can really go down the rabbit hole there. And then every region, not even just in one state, it could be separate municipalities within a state, have different requirements for cyber notification and security. New York State is a good example. California is another good example, where there's multiple layers of requirements depending on which part of that state you're operating in.
So there's a lot of facets to it than just, hey, just getting insurance to protect me if my computers go down because of some type of cybercrime. I think ransomware is the one that a lot of people think of, but that's not the only thing that can be, classified as cybercrime. We working in technology, and from Terrapin side, we see things that go anywhere from where people have a Exchange server or Microsoft 365 or other online services that are breached somehow, maybe an on-site server that is breached because of a 0-day type of hack that comes available and has come to light and has to be patched and things like that. And I know that we've had, not Matt and I, but in previous webinars, we've talked about different things that you can do to secure your computer and your network, things preventively. And then also there's reactively, type things that you can do to protect yourself. But many a times when people are talking about cybersecurity, even implementing the preventive measures, many a times we hear things like, we're just too small, it's not going to happen to us type of mentality. What would you have to say to that? if anyone who is contemplating cybersecurity insurance, or, I'm too small, that's not going to happen to me. It's not going to have that big of an impact.
We it's funny. We thought the same way. We always secured our files. If you go back to, the mid 90s and late 90s when I was starting out, you
Hmm.
secured files, you were worried about employee theft and things like that. Well, it's easier for a bad actor to gain access to your critical data. And really the cost of cyber insurance, although it has exponentially increased in recent years, it
Hmm.
exponentially increased from a very low starting point. Our examples, I think we filed well over six figures in claim payments on our own cyber. Many of it's just notifications and there's investigative costs that the carrier incurs. And we're still paying in the low single digit thousands of dollar range for coverage. And those claims were just in the last 4 or 5 years.
Interesting. So, what are some of the cyber insurance changes you've seen over, let's just say like the last, say, 3 or 4 years? What are some things that you've seen?
One of them is cyber insurance. We think it's going to cover all digital assets. It actually covers physical assets too. So one of ours was we had suspected and then found out that a former employee took both digital and physical files, and both of which were secured by the cyber policy. And then there was the investigative portion where someone like Terrapin would be able to run the reports, but there's a
Hmm.
cost to that to see every machine within our facility that this person had access to in the last 6 months, every thumb drive that had accessed, every file transfer from the server to a local machine was able to be pulled, reviewed, and scrubbed. And these are things that nobody thought of in traditional cyber coverage. Or one new one now is the direction of electronic funds. So we had a client that does a lot of work for a large manufacturing firm or manufacturing components firm. They do the install. Well, any payment for components over $100,000 is required to be wired. They didn't have the control in place to do a second step of verification just from the electronic verification of wire instructions. The day before Thanksgiving 2020, they initiated the wire. It funded the day after Thanksgiving 2020, and mid-December, $157,000 payment had still not been received by their supplier. Um,
Wow.
the weird thing is that they didn't have the coverage, but that kind of coverage for wrongful instruction or social engineering, it really depends on which classification it falls under the policy, but
Hmm.
both could respond. In this individual case, we're in Northern California. They were able to identify the bank account it went to in a Los Angeles area Wells Fargo branch. They even were able to obtain through law enforcement video footage of an individual taking a cash withdrawal from the bank, but yet still could not recover the funds. Whereas some or all could have been provided under a cyber policy and insured that way. Um,
Wow.
and that's what now, because those have become apparent, there are multiple questions if you want to have that. And that adds almost an additional page of fine print questions and confirmations that have to be made when applying for cyber insurance.
So just in this particular instance that you're referring to, you can see all the intricate threads that come together that you don't necessarily think about, and yet that's what the insurance is there to help you cover. You talked about the discovery part of it and the forensic side. That's something that Terrapin does, and we have a team that will do that and produce reports for those that are affected by that, or by insurance carriers who request that type of reporting to do that. But now,
Mhm.
let's talk. These different types of events that can happen. What are some of the red flags that underwriters look for when they're looking at applicants for cyber insurance that it could either disqualify you or maybe drastically increase the cost of the insurance?
The underwriting process actually has a little bit of physical discovery involved, or not physical, but a little investigative discovery in it now. Most
Hmm.
carriers that have been issuing and covering cyber insurance, for more than, let's say, 18 to 24 months, now will verify domain security as well as website security. And then they will want to know many more things. Two-factor authentication is pretty much a must now if you want to have anything aside from the bare bones reimbursement of costs for breach and access of customer data. If you want coverage
Mhm.
for your own stuff on your cyber, which really we're seeing is probably anywhere from 60 to 80, 85% of the claims we're seeing amongst our clients are not breach of data that where somebody stole, social security numbers or somebody stole protected data. It's they are locking data and it's causing business income losses that can also be reimbursed under these policies. And so it gets to be the underwriting process is very large because they're basically underwriting your entire operation and covering anything along a large, broad backstop that can be anywhere argued to revolve around cyber.
Interesting. So that's basically where you take two-factor authentication, you know, password policies where you have to change your passwords or meet a certain requirement of complexity for your passwords are no longer discretionary, but almost becoming requirements to either obtain the coverage or have a pretty significant, uh, you know, change in the money that would be involved for getting that coverage. Now, could there be grounds for declining a request? Let's say that I have cybersecurity insurance for cybercrime. Uh, is there something that could impact my being covered and being declined, for an incident?
So we recommend when a client or a potential new client applies for the insurance that they verify the responses if there's any question when they're responding to the application questions with their IT service provider. And the reason being is that if you answer incorrectly, it really becomes up to the insurance company's discretion how they classify that incorrect answer at the time of a claim. Now, if
Hmm.
it's intentional, the way insurance goes is that an intentional misrepresentation at the time of application is grounds for rescission at the time of claim or discovery on the part of the carrier, which means that then the insurance company would refund the prorated amount of premium they have, that they've collected on your policy to you and say, basically, best of luck with your claim scenario. We're not paying it. Um,
Wow.
and the issue is that now that we're asking for or not we, but the carriers are asking for very technical and specific data, they need a technical and specific response. And we haven't seen to where a client has to absorb really any cost to fill that out, because as long as your services provider for IT is of the caliber that would be recommending most of those services, they know pretty quick and can turn around that application very, not immediate because they're not computers, but themselves, but the individuals working there could turn it around really fast, have it
Right.
accurate. And then if something is missing that underwriting requests or requires, can instantly give their customer or clients, some guidance on, hey, here's what it would cost approximately to input this if you needed it.
Very true. And we've had clients that have done that where we filled that out for them and made recommendations based on what we saw. And we've turned that around pretty quick. That's very interesting because, like you said, these used to be like 3 or 4 questions, and now I've seen them, be 5+ pages of information. It's very interesting. So now, but now this kind of hits at home for you because you actually went through this whole experience, right?
Yes, yes. We did. It was mid 2019. And it was prior to us being prepared to work remote and everything else. So we went through pretty
Hmm.
much the full pain of one of these scenarios.
Wow. So how did that affect your business? Let's just kind of put it that way. What
Yeah.
I guess I should put up my other slide here. What was the outcome of that, and how did it affect you, and what changes came out of that event?
Okay. So real quick on the event. So July 10th, 2019, I was in the office around 6 a.m. Got a little bit of work done, and then I left for my sunrise Rotary meeting. Everything was working. I came back, about 8:15 because the meeting was just, I don't know, maybe 10 blocks away,
Hmm.
and all hell had broken loose in the building. Every screen basically had a little notepad, and it had a demand on it. Our entire system was locked down. We use voice over, we use a VoIP phone system. So basically, we were dead in the water. We instantly called our carrier because most carriers also have what's called a breach response unit to where they'll instantly get started.
Mhm.
We inadvertently had some redundancy equipment in place. So we had a Sacramento office that had been temporarily closed, and we're down in the Modesto area. So having got the breach response in place with our IT provider, I myself actually shot up and picked up the equipment, brought it down. We set up a secondary network fully independent of what we had that was breached. And we were able to at least be limping along by about mid-afternoon that day. But we learned quite a few lessons along the way. We're fortunate we'd spent literally the extra 80, I can't even remember off the top of my head, it was either 83 or 89 more dollars for the proper policy instead of the improper policy.
Mhm.
And you really, penny wise and dollar foolish doesn't even really speak to the account of that. Those $89 saved us tens of thousands in claim reimbursement. But yeah, our entire system was locked. We lost some of our hardware, which is also known as bricking coverage on a policy. I, at the
Mhm.
time, was ignorant to it. It looks like there's additional coverages in there. Yeah, we'll buy that one. Um, Thankfully, my cavalier attitude directed me in the right direction, because we lost a server because of the way it just was irreparable in what had happened.
Wow.
Our policy also provided coverage for the demand in Bitcoin that we received. Fortunately, it didn't have to pay. But our system was breached very similarly to the Target breach that happened a number of years ago, where a contractor sent into accounts payable at Target corporate, and that email had already been infected and then infected Target, where they had their massive data breach. For us, it was a former IT service provider that actually got hacked, and a bad actor put basically like a ticking time bomb, and it was downloaded to over 400 customers like us as one of them, and it all deployed at the same moment.
Wow.
So everyone was shut down. So it was even hard for us to get that tech provider to facilitate. So we were in emergency mode. We brought in anybody we could locally to help assist, and fortunately that worked. It was over summer, so a number of our employees have kids' laptops at home. Our insurance company actually authorized the same day as the breach to bring in their laptops, upgrade hardware, back up their system, then basically re-image it, or however you say it, to be one of our systems, and then pay the child $10 a day for rental on their equipment. And then when the breach was over, we gave them back the equipment with the upgraded hardware in it, and it covered that less our deductible.
Wow.
It's pretty intriguing the way it worked out. We're very blessed the way it worked out. It will cover loss of income. There is a waiting period. So most of the customers of this IT company that got hit with that breach, about 70% of them were down for 2 to 3 weeks. We were down less than 5 business days. That's a testament to my team, and we worked very aggressively. It
Mhm.
did limit our claim reimbursement. So we made the business decision immediately that we're not going to lose a customer of ours for not being able to get back to them and not being able to provide them the insurance and risk management services that we provide. So
Right.
we incurred probably a third of our overall claim cost in the first 72 hours. And those expenses in the first 72 hours on our policy are not reimbursed. So it was tens of thousands of dollars, but we were up a week or two in advance, right?
Yeah.
And that for us far outweighed the cost of the other portion. And then we paid a number of our employees overtime. Fortunately for us, not knowing this is where we've had other clients with breach issues have frustration. If your employees are only salary and exempt from overtime, and they work tens or hundreds of hours to help resolve a breach, that's non-reimbursable time because it's part of their base salary from an insurance standpoint. Whereas in retail insurance agencies and brokerages we are exempt from the overtime exemption in most cases. So we actually pay overtime. We pay salary equivalent, and we only pay over. We don't actually cut down on hours and reduce incomes. But
Mhm.
because of that, we were able to report overtime, and I think it was a sizable amount of overtime went to our team in that from hour 7201 and on, for them
So
to.
when you start getting into those hours and talking about, loss of income and loss of business, in addition to the hardware and the forensics and the recovery and everything, and then there's the whole notifying everybody that was involved, right? Because is it just notifying your clients, or how deep do the notifications have to go? And did you have to call them, or how did that work?
So yeah, the process was we had to do a full forensic audit, and that luckily that was able to be done pretty much in parallel with getting us back up to speed. So we didn't lose much time there. And
Mhm.
then the forensic audit is reviewed by legal counsel who specialize in just this. Now, I was of the opinion we're gonna have to notify everybody. We went over we cited the statute, and when it really came down to it, we didn't legally in any jurisdiction have to notify, because not one file, once the forensic audit was done in review, not one file had actually been accessed. They had just been locked. The system had been locked. Now, what we did do though is we're still very open. You can get the white paper that we're discussing the basic facts off of from our website, because if we're not fully transparent with it, it just doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't look right. So what we do is we are fully transparent with it. But yeah, the forensic audit, we showed what the requirement was to notify. Really, there was no notification cost there. If there was, our policy would have paid to notify and would have paid to actually provide at least a year of identity lock and protection for anybody impacted up to our policy limit, which for that portion would have been $1 million limit at the time.
Wow. And the white paper that Matt is referring to is on their website, and I highly recommend you go to their website and take a look at it. The costs that are listed there for how it affected him, and like he said, how long, Matt, were you down until you were recovered back again? How long was that?
We were down just shy of a week, and most others in the same exact incident were 2 to 3 weeks or more.
Wow. So, you look at this white paper, and I'm looking at some of the numbers here. For example, the forensic audit was, 5,600 and some change. You have legal costs. You have the business income that was impacted. That was over $30,000, 15 plus for other extra expenses and so on, that you're like, wow, so this is more than just, hey, I've got this virus on my computer and I need to like get it off. There is so much more involved that the insurance covers, honestly, to help you maintain business continuity so that, you can still pay your employees, your business, you know, it's going to be an interruption in business, but it helps minimize that and then reimburse for that. So it's not such a huge hit on the business and the employees and everybody else and what's going on. It's pretty impressive. And for you to kind of, like you said, being very transparent and looking at all of this, it's quite an incredible read to get the numbers and how it affected you, what was involved. It's very detailed, and very, very detailed. So kudos on that, and thank you for sharing it. Now, that kind of comes to our last thing here is, some common takeaways from this whole situation. We've talked about a few of these, but I thought I'd throw some of these questions here just at the very end to tie things together for us about what's covered and what's not covered. So you talked about a lot of things that were covered that you may not have known about. Were there, or are there things that are not covered that you did not know about, or people in general, when you talk to them, were not aware that it did not cover?
Yeah, so there's a number of coverages in on a typical cyber policy, especially the ones that are very robust. And
Hmm.
what's nice now is the insurance industry as a whole has started to have a more consistent summary of coverages. So there's, in many cases we can get anywhere from 3 to 12 or more quotes
Hmm.
and proposals, and actually have them line by line up, so you can see what coverage is different, what carrier rating is one has versus another. But one very important thing is pretty much every cyber policy is going to cover first party breach and first party issues, which would be if my system was breached. My
Hmm.
entire white paper of what happened to our business was a third party breach, which is typically not covered unless it's underwritten for and additional premiums charged for. Same thing, business income is not automatically included. For us, we had to absorb a lot of business income because of the nature of our business. In insurance, we do a lot of work courting, advising, and then working on getting quotes and negotiating rate for a customer prior to them actually signing the bottom line, paying their deposit, then working with us. So for us, our new business pipeline really struggled. And what I learned is we need to have redundancy on that. So even though we had recreation of data, there was no a way to recreate the timeline of where we were with a number of potential new customers. So we would estimate roughly $10,000 to $20,000 in annual revenues could have been lost, but we have no way of proving it. And if you can't prove it, you can't insure it. And if you can't get either of those, you're not going to get reimbursed for it.
Right.
Yeah, and then we talked about there's social engineering, bricking. So bricking is the damage to the actual physical equipment, because there is a way when some of these things happen, the equipment does not run the same. Now I have to admit some ignorance here and just lack of knowledge in how that works, but IT service providers can talk about it all day long. And basically you're running the engine, you're running a gasoline engine with no coolant in the radiator, and it can cause damage, or the machine was already aging anyway and it dies. So bricking coverage covers for that. And social engineering covers for that example I'd mentioned previously of wrongful instruction for directing monies. And even if a customer doesn't have secondary protocols in place, the carrier will recommend and require. And then if it wasn't in place at the time of a claim, then they won't pay for it. But yeah, there's a number of coverages. I can go on for a long time on those. But really it comes down to not every business also needs every coverage. So you don't want to insure yourself to death. But I'd say in the near term, from now to anywhere from 1 to 4 years from now, you could pretty much get the majority of coverages very affordably still. I think we're still a few years away from the marketplace and the carriers actually absorbing claim dollars enough to then have to raise rates to adequately rate for it. So I think we're actually underpriced right now.
Interesting. And if there were some lessons that you learned, from this whole breach, things that you wish you had done a little bit better in either preparing. I know you had mentioned about some accidental redundancy that you had. What were some things in relation to that in hindsight you wish you had done, or maybe bolstered a little bit better, or spent a little bit more time on, or investment?
One example is we always have, every time we buy equipment, we always make sure we have 10% more number of machines we need. Now we're a smaller firm, we don't have hundreds of employees. So 10% of machines, we're talking, single digits of extra machines. Or if we've upgraded, we maintain the old ones and have them there, not connected to the network, in case we have to set up remotely. And then also making sure that our IT service provider has cyber insurance themselves. Now it's actually not going to be cyber. It's going to be most likely under their professional liability, but you want to make sure that's there too. And almost all of our customers that do the work have it. But that's because when we had our breach, when they fortunately our IT company and us, we had cyber, they had professional, our insurance companies were able to negotiate, and we were still able to work together to come to a resolution. You always want to be on the same team. You don't want to be adversarial. And if one or both of us didn't have insurance, it would have became adversarial. So that's those are a couple of big takeaways. An ounce of prevention is always worth a pound of cure.
Yeah, for sure. And I know a big one that we've always talked about in the past, we've talked about security events and things, is having a really good, robust backup system. And that doesn't mean that it has to break the bank, but something that's going to provide protection with a minimal downtime and a way to be able to get things back up and running, quickly. In addition to the other preventive measures that you may have, the backup by far is one of the things that we standardize on, because honestly, when there's not a good backup in place, you're not going to sleep good at night. The worst IT things you can come to mind just go through your head at night on, I wonder if this is going to happen. We're going to do this, or that's going to happen, or someone's going to do this, or bring in, or it runs through your mind on what's going to happen. So I could talk just as long as you could talk about insurance on the cyber insurance and different aspects, I could talk about backups and security from the IT side. So in any event, thank you for sharing all of this with us. And for those of you that are listening in, if you have questions regarding cyber insurance, feel free to reach out to Matt and his team. We have the email address there, info@gdiins.com. They'll be happy to help you. Obviously, any technical questions or et cetera, you can always reach out to us at info@terrapintechnology.com. Matt, thank you for sharing your experience with us, your expertise in this area. Obviously, when it comes to working technical, or in this case, we're trying to negotiate and figure out what is the best cyber insurance and protection that we need. Talking to somebody who's well-versed in it and educated in that area is going to help you to get what works best for you. Matt, thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.